In conversation with Dennis Torres. Dennis Torres has lived a life fueled by curiosity and adventure. Retired professor from a top West Coast university, he created and taught one of the most sought after MBA courses on wealth, power, and ethics. Beyond the classroom, his experiences span over 64 jobs, including big rig truck driver, commercial pilot, industrial engineer, and even soldier during the Vietnam War. The adventurous spirit has taken him into the depth of the Amazon rainforest with strangers and across the world, always chasing new challenges. Dennis is also the author of three adventure novels and the best-selling book, The Curse, where he shares his unique insight on building wealth and sources through an ethical lens, blending his life experiences with practical wisdom. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today Dennis Torres. How are you doing, Dennis?
Excellent. Thank you. And I hope the same is for you.
Yeah, I'm doing very fine as well. And it's quite great to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming on.
Well, my pleasure. And so nice not only to meet you and to talk about our mutual favorite things, literature,
Mm,
but to be able to communicate from great distance away.
absolutely. Importance of technology. Speaking all over the ocean and sea. Yeah. Thank you. So, Dennis, I want to first say that I was impressed and taken aback reading through the discussion page of your book, The Amazon of Ray Goldbruch Rivera on Amazon. I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, though, which is the first book in the Alive World Lived series. And I would like to ask you, what was it like to travel with complete strangers into a part of the world that you had never been to before and ultimately live in the Amazon rainforest on your own and somehow make it back alive? I think there might be a lot, really. But I'd love to ask you to hear from the horse's mouth.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that I never planned on doing that trip. Okay. It just is, I was looking for work, and the only jobs that were available, and this adventure came after I returned from Vietnam. So I had been away from the United States for a year, away from home, and the life I was living in the military in the war was so different that when I came back to America, uh, it was like being on the moon almost. Okay. I was only
Wow.
gone a year, but it felt like I was a lifetime. And, and because of everything was so different, mentally and physically. So when I was looking for a job, the only jobs were available, put on a suit and tie and try to sell insurance. And that was something that after Vietnam was not working for me. But then I saw an ad in the paper that said, want to explore the Amazon. And I said, that
Mm.
sounds interesting and exciting, better than selling insurance. And the woman who put the ad in was a member of the International Explorers Club. And the short answer is that she
Wow.
talked me into taking the trip.
Oh.
And how we decided I would go is to drive my 19 at that time 1962 Volkswagen Beetle from Los Angeles area all the way down to the country of Panama. And then I would sell the car in Panama because you can't drive to South America even today.
Wow.
And then I would use the money to support myself for as long as I wanted to go. When I was gone a year, and have adventures. And she also taught me how I could make money on this trip if I wanted. And I use that mentally as an excuse for going, okay, collecting pre-Columbian artifacts, diving for gold in the rivers, uh, and buying emeralds on the black market in Colombia, and then selling them back in the United States. So
Wow.
there were ways to do it, but I went really for the adventure.
Wow.
And part of that adventure was to live in the Amazon, uh, because I wanted to experience survival at the very basic level.
Mm.
Okay, so that I would see what insights came to me. So on the way down, since you asked, I went with two strangers. Okay, the idea of the strangers was to help share the expense, and they also obviously wanted to go to the Amazon too, because that's where we are headed. But and one was a girl who had backpacked through Africa, but she had never been to the Amazon, and the other was a California surfer who had never been out of California.
Oh,
So, so we had some great adventures driving through Mexico and the Central American countries, and then ending up in Panama,
mm,
where the girl left because she found a group of missionaries that were preaching Christianity to the indigenous peoples of Panama.
wow.
And and later, when we got to South America, the surfer had to leave because he had a family emergency. And then I went on to live in the Amazon for many months. And when I returned from that, I backpacked all over South America and had some great adventures, met some interesting people, learned a lot of things, and then came back through Ecuador on a banana boat. That's a freighter that was shipping bananas from Esmeraldas, Ecuador to
Wow.
Tampa, Florida.
Oh, oh, wow. That sounds to me like a lot of adventure you've got in there, a lot of storyline. And, while you were speaking, I wanted to ask you, do you still, or are you still in contact with those other two people, the lady and the guy till today, or that's the last you heard from them?
Well, interesting that you should ask. Several years after I got back, I had a call from the guy.
Oh,
And he said just he didn't know why he called. He said he just felt that he should call and maybe there some another adventure. Then I had and there wasn't. I was busy doing other things. But after the book came out, he ended up calling me, and we talked about the trip, which he said was the highlight of his life. And
wow,
then he told me also about other adventures he had when he got back. He ended up driving to Alaska from Los Angeles and working on a oil platform for several years.
wow, wow.
So he continued the adventure.
That is quite amazing to know, really. Thank you so much for sharing. Then you have the follow-up book to this series in the name of There Is No Good Giant. For readers who haven't read the series yet and without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what you had expect picking up There Is No Good Giant? And also, how did you come up with such a name title?
Okay, well, one of my favorite poets was a man named Walter Benton, and he was a lieutenant. No, I'm sorry, a captain during World War II, stationed in Europe, and he wrote poems back to his wife in the States. And one of his poems was called "There Are No Good Giants," because he saw that war was started by giants, maybe with good intentions, but it all seemed to be based on war, seemed to be based on some kind of monetary gain
Yeah.
that was involved in it. And so he's essentially in the poem, he's saying that his country, the United States, was a giant,
Mm,
but there were negative things that induced people to going to war. And I saw that same thing in Vietnam. Okay, I saw
wow.
that it was, of course, there are no such things as a good and just war. And, as I found out, the Vietnamese people didn't come here to California and start killing the people living here where we went there. And ostensibly, the military said we were there to prevent the spread of communism. Well,
Mm,
maybe okay, and that wasn't the case. There were many other reasons for that war, and in my opinion and in my experience, we should not have been involved in it at all.
so,
Okay, some of it was tribal. Some of it, the North was largely Catholic. The South was Buddhist. There was some tensions there because of the differences, and there were some tribal differences
mm,
from people. And And some people resented the government that we helped install in the South. Ho Chi Minh, who was in the North, loved the United States. He lived and worked as a baker in a hotel in Boston,
Wow.
and he wanted to unite the country, and he wanted to use the U.S. Constitution as the Constitution for Vietnam. And at first, the U.S. backed him because this was a man who had the same ideals we did. But
Yeah.
then they found that the U.S. government said we have a greater obligation to the French because the French helped us during the American Revolution.
Mm.
Okay. Uh, and so that left Ho Chi Minh with to go to the Chinese to help him in his battle to unite the country. I mean, that's maybe oversimplification, but you can tell from that the war had very little to do with what was ostensibly supposed to be.
That's quite amazing, really. I love your description of that. And I enjoy you talking about it. Thank you so much for mentioning and letting us know how the second series came to be. That was quite exciting, yeah? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wanted to say I didn't want to write a book. Here's a copy of it. And again,
No.
we were fortunate, and you can see that the cover design is big boots stamping all over the globe, the world.
Mm.
Uh, I didn't want to write a book about combat, and although there's some of it in here, you can't help it in a war book. But
Oh,
I wanted to write how everyday people lived, what they thought, and the U.S. You might have known it was very divided with the recent election for president.
yeah.
Uh, Perhaps more divided than any time since the Civil War.
Yeah.
And the same was true for the Vietnamese people in the South. Some members of the families sympathized with the North, and others sympathized with the South, and they were torn apart.
Mm.
Okay, because some people said, America is just going to want to colonialize the South, and they installed a president who had been living in the United States for many years, and other people said, no, we want the independence from the North for their various reasons, like, hey, the Catholics were Buddhists, etc. And so I wanted to show how that affected the economy, how that affected relations with the family, and how they went to work and their aspirations and their children and the political climate in the country.
Mm.
So that's
Oh,
what the book is about. Yeah.
that's quite amazing, really. And I love your take on that. Very, very great. Quite interesting and very pulling. And I'd also like to ask you, you married your wife after 6 weeks of knowing her, and then you traveled across North America together. How did you know she was the one, and what was it like to drop everything and travel for a year together? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, how do you know? I suppose we just did. You're right. We met in a coffee shop in Hollywood, and we went home together that evening and never parted. And 6 weeks later, we were married. Her family came from the East Coast. My family was in California, and we had a wedding here. And then I said, well, I want to continue as a writer. And so I had my little portable typewriter, and we didn't have a lot of money, in fact, very little money. We bought a tent trailer, a camper,
Wow.
and we said, well, let's go for a year and see if I can make a good living as a writer or not. And we traveled all over the United States and Canada for a year
Wow.
and ended up coming back to LA. So,
Wow.
by the way, we've been married 55 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot, really. That's a lot of years you've got in there. Thank you so much for sharing and letting us know a bit about her. Thank you. I know, Dennis, one of the most interesting things to me as a writer is to listen to readers' feedbacks. And you may want to agree with me that one of the things that make literature to be complex in its entirety is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions. And sometimes some readers might get the message intended by the author. Sometimes they might be close to getting the message. Sometimes they might be far from getting the message. And most times they might hilariously misunderstand the message. As interestingly fun as it sounds, I would love to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? How does it make you feel?
Well, I'm fine with that. It was the same in my teaching. I never judged my students. Half of my students were international. Most of them came from China and India, but they were all over the world, from different countries in Africa
Mm,
and different countries in Europe, Australia. And the the beauty was that we had different experiences to share. We always interpret everything not as it is, but as we are. We see the eyes through our conditioning in life. Um, for instance, some of the topics that we talked about in ethics were child labor. Okay, well, in countries where they had child labor, the students would tell other students, well, what do you want? These kids should starve to death. Okay, instead of starving to death, we're giving them jobs. Okay, some countries they ate dogs. Well, in the United States, people love dogs more than their children, and they say that's terrible. Uh, and I found out too from one of my students during that conversation that he was from Switzerland,
mm,
and he said that's a dirty secret from Switzerland that some people eat dogs, especially around Christmas time. We were all shocked because we thought only certain Asian countries ate dogs. Since we look at Switzerland as a Western country, how could they do that? But to answer your question is that we all see things not as they are, but as we are. And that's I write the books to provoke thought,
mm,
not to tell anybody this is the way it should be interpreted, this is
mm.
the way you should see it. I just want you to think about it and see where it takes you. I
Well,
write because I'm a curious person. And so I look at something and I say, wow, I'm very, very curious. I want to learn why people see it through their eyes. Like our presidential election that just happened. I was not for the president that got elected. And as you may know, but I said to myself, wow, this is going to be a great opportunity
mm,
for me to learn from the people who saw differently, who thought differently. I want to see life through their eyes.
wow.
Okay. So it was a certain excitement to that so that I could learn.
Mm,
And when I write, I want people to see how I saw things through my eyes,
mm,
and they can it will provoke thought in their mind, and they could think about it and perhaps see something differently.
yeah, yeah. That's a beautiful one. I mean, I've been enjoying your answer to this question so far. To me, it's been sounding quite fun. Very great and very amazing. And I love your take on this. I love your story about your wife. I love your story about how you react to, you know, feedbacks and how you get messages, people intending your works in the different ways. It's been fun. Yeah. Thank you, Dennis. Yeah. You have had so many adventure in your life and many ended up quite dangerous. Do you ever regret putting yourself in some of the situation you found yourself in? I don't know if that's a hard question to ask.
I was in some very tough situations, especially on the South American trip. In Vietnam, it was a war, of course. I didn't think most of the people that I encountered in Vietnam, most of the soldiers, they
Hmm.
weren't so much afraid of dying. Of course, some were more than
Wow.
others. They
Wow.
were afraid. They were afraid of coming back as a complete invalid. Okay,
Mm,
like a vegetable. Okay, and they preferred death to coming back that way. That was their greatest fear.
wow.
Naturally, some fear death altogether. But to answer your question in another way, when I was on that Amazon trip, I came close to death several times.
Wow.
And my greatest fear was that my parents would never know what happened to me and the harm that it would do to them.
Mm.
Okay, because in the middle of the jungle, I would never be found. And if I was found, nobody would know who or what or where or that I belonged to or how to communicate with people. And
Wow.
so, in fact, I even thought of Nelson Rockefeller, who was a
Wow.
governor. I believe it was his son, Michael Rockefeller, who disappeared, I think, in Borneo on a
Mm.
trip, and they never knew what happened to him. It's theorized that he was eaten by cannibals.
Wow.
Okay, but they searched and searched and searched, and to this day, nobody knows for sure what happened to him. And that's what ran through my mind. I said my parents would suffer the rest of their lives not knowing what happened to me. Um, so, I that was my biggest fear in some of those situations where a couple of them I thought I was dead for sure, not a question. Okay, and to this day, I don't even like to think about it because I was like 1 second away from death a few times.
Wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That sounds to be very emotional, quite pulling, quite compelling, absorbing, and thoughtful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing and thank you for letting us know a bit about that. Yeah. Sounds like a lot really in there.
I learned from the people I met in all my adventures.
Mm.
Okay, I wanted to learn about life through their eyes, and that's really what I seek. I seek to learn about life from different experiences because just one example on that trip through the Amazon, there are people that live in isolation. You'll see one grass hut, no roads there, no
Wow.
boats there. They're living there. So I say they don't know about countries. They don't know about governments. They don't know about technology. They don't know about
Wow.
electricity and how what
It's
is in their head about the world.
wow. Really?
Okay, and it's very interesting because their lives are as valuable as our lives. Okay, they're no different than we are. They're human beings, and
Wow.
but yet life is envisioned differently than we do because of our experiences and what we're exposed to.
Well, as we are speaking, I'm kind of imagining what would be. I'm kind of imagining how such a life would look like. Life where you have to live in isolation. I was gonna ask how they get food. I don't know. Maybe they do farming or they do some fishing in the water side. But I was just imagining how living in isolation would feel like when there's no access. But I'm pretty sure there won't be access to internet connection over there because it's a place surrounded with bushes and forest, yeah. And all of those things, like you mentioned, government, nothing, they're just on their own. No, no pressure, no social media pressure. Or getting to know what the hell is going on the technological space, yeah. The news, the trending stories, etc. Wow, that sounds like something one would love to do for a month. I mean, I think it's actually a very nice thing to do to just go into, you know, call it not really extinction, just go into solitude, quietness for like a month and two, then return back to the actual usual world that we know of. Yeah, I think it's something nice to do once in a while, but even give us some more sense of writing inspirations and ideas. I'm just saying my own, you know.
Yeah, for instance, when I lived in the Amazon, uh, my vision at night improved because we had no ambient lighting. Okay, my hearing improved. I could hear an insect, I say a half a mile away, buzzing. Okay, I
Ah,
tell the diff after a while I could tell what kind of animal was making what kind of sound, what kind of bird was making that sound. You learned about what you can eat, what you can eat. And I watched my entertainment was watching ants the ants in the Amazon are very, very large, and they're probably in some ways the most dangerous creatures in the Amazon because they could kill anything.
Really?
Okay, and they are yet they're very civilized in their colonies. But if another insect or animal would go near their colonies, they would fight to the death.
Wow.
Okay, they're very powerful. Yeah, most people think, well, the jaguars and the tapirs and all these other animals
Lion.
are snakes, but really insects. Insects rule the world. That's what you
Wow.
find out in the Amazon. The insects rule the world,
Wow.
and ants are very, very interesting creatures.
Wow. Wow, that's quite amazing. I wanted you to go on and on and on, but we have to round up because of the time. That's quite beautiful. I love your take. I love your description of the book. Thank you. And I'd also like to ask you, most people have a few different jobs in their lives, but you had 64. Why did you choose to continuously switch careers? Also, what adventure caused you to learn the most about yourself? What did you learn?
Well, I've always been curious. As a child, I had great fantasies in my mind. For
Mm,
instance, we'd pick up my grandparents would come up once a year from Florida to New Jersey where I lived, and they'd come on the train, and I would look at the tracks and I say, "Wow, if I follow those tracks, I can go all the way to Florida, or I can go all the way to California." And that's what my imagination.
was,
My jobs very often I didn't say I'm going to look for another job. Something would happen. In my book called, I'll show you the title here. In this
uh,
one called Not Far from the Ocean.
half of the ocean.
This one is about four different jobs I had uh, that reflect also on the Cultural Revolution of the hippies during the 60s, and how I switched those jobs. It
Mm,
was just all of a sudden a thought would come up, and I say, "That's interesting. I think I'll go there," and then I would leave and do that. Okay. When I was an engineer, for example,
mm.
I met somebody who owned a dairy farm, and I knew
Wow,
nothing about dairy farming, so I quit being an engineer and worked on the dairy farm. Okay. And I learned all about that. I was fascinated. I was fascinated that each cow knew you and you knew them. You knew their family, and they could tell you
wow,
if a stranger came in the barn, they'd be very nervous. Okay.
wow.
Uh, and the whole culture of farming and the connection you have with the land and with the crops and with the animals,
Mm,
you help them give birth. It was all just fascinating. And
mm.
my life has been that way. So I take jobs because they're fascinating. I never intended, in fact, I never liked school. I never intended to become a university professor.
Oh,
But it
wow,
was okay. But I went to law school because I was curious about laws. I didn't want to become a lawyer. I wanted to learn about laws.
wow.
So, and when I found out the university had a the number one course in the country for dispute resolution, I went and got a master's in dispute resolution to figure out how to solve disputes. In fact, that's the book I'm working on now, which will be out in the first quarter of next year.
Mm,
It's called Looking for Blue Sky. Blue sky is a term for finding out of the box solutions to problems.
mm.
And so I
Wow,
had one of my careers was as a mediator and arbitrator of litigated cases, and I did over 1,000 of them. And
wow.
I got to see what causes people to have disputes and how we can resolve disputes.
Mm. Oh, wow, that's quite amazing, really. I love your take on this, really. And I've been enjoying this conversation so far. Thank you so much for sharing. And just apart from A Live War Lived, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on? Also, what sort of advice would you give struggling writers?
Well, I think people write. there was interesting. Somebody I think was on an interview program
Yeah.
where they said the writer said that so and so was their muse, and somebody said no, you don't need a muse. If you're a writer, the story has to come out. Period. You don't even need a muse to make it come out. And I think as a writer, to realize that if you're a writer, you get up and you write and don't worry about it. And what I find is you write what comes through your mind, some days more than others. Some days you'll like it, some days you won't. And you just, all you have to do is just do it. And ultimately, you write it, you re-edit it, you rewrite, you re-edit, edit, and you do it because that's what you have to do. So
Wow.
don't worry about some people think, well, this is junk I'm writing. Well, no, just keep doing it. It's going to take, it's got its own adventure.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness. Sounds to me to be very fun. Thank you so much for sharing. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would love to get a copy of, any of your books, on what platform are they available on for purchase?
Well, fortunately, they're available at any place where you can get books. Walmart, the big bookstores, and if they don't have them, they can order them because I'm in the Ingram Sparks catalog where all the bookstores buy from. But the easiest is Amazon. The easiest one is just go to Amazon and Amazon, if they started off as a book company and they still do a good job of getting books out instantly, and they're available hardback, softback, ebook.
Yeah. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Dennis Torres' books directly on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, on Ingram Spark, and also on other platform. I also left a link to his website and social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Dennis, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say it's more than awesome, very great, quite lovely having this conversation with you around your beautiful titles. Thanks for coming on.
And thank you for having me. And it's so interesting to meet you. And I would wish we had more time so I could learn more about you and your thoughts, your experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you.